14-year-old girl is forced to divorce her family after learning one concerning detail. On Christmas Day in 1978, the quiet Florida town of Wauchula was filled with the most welcome sound, the cries of two newborn babies. The girls were born between November 29th and December 2nd, and their journeys would converge in a way no one had ever expected.
Before we begin, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to our channel, and click the notification bell for more amazing videos.
14 years later, Kimberly Mays was known throughout the country as the girl who divorced her own family. Some people called her brave, others called her spoiled, but what everyone could agree upon was this: Kimberly's story, and the sensational court case that followed, was one the quiet town of Wauchula and the nation would never forget. In early December 1978, Regina Twigg walked through the maternity ward of Hardy Memorial Hospital, pulling her four behind her. The ward was empty, except for a lone woman holding a baby. Instead of looking elated at her newborn daughter, the woman was on the verge of tears. Before she could ask her what was wrong, however, a nurse pulled Regina out of the room with just one sentence: "This is a very sad story." Decades after that strange moment in the maternity ward, she and that sad woman's paths would cross yet again. Back in 1978, however, all Regina could do was count her blessings. This time, the sadness wasn't about her. Regina and Ernest Twigg already had 5 children, but when they'd entered the maternity ward that day, all they could think about was the sudden death of their daughter Vivia from a heart defect a few years before. But as it turned out, they had no reason to worry. Mere hours after her birth, baby Arlena was thriving and breastfeeding like a champ. When Regina saw Arlena the next morning, however, it was like a light had been dimmed. Arlena's pink cheeks were blue, she had lost ounces of weight overnight, and she refused to breastfeed. All at once, Regina's fears came rushing back, and this time, they were confirmed: Arlena had a heart defect. Arlena needed to be monitored for the rest of her life. "We didn't know from one day to the next. Are we gonna lose her, too?" Arlena's oldest sister recalled. Regina was extremely protective of Arlena, who grew to be a weak but sweet kid. Mere miles away, another family was grappling with their own newborn addition. Barbara and Bob Mays were brand new parents, but unlike Arlena, their daughter was a picture of health. The Mays practically belonged on a greeting card. On the outside, anyway. The reality was that Kimberly's birth was long and arduous, requiring an unexpected C-section that left both Barbara and Kimberly worse for wear. After a long recovery process, however, the family of 3 finally returned home. That is, until Barbara was diagnosed with cancer. 2 years later, Kimberly and Bob became a family of 2. Bob remarried, and Kimberly seemed to live a privileged life, nothing like little Arlena from the other side of town. At just 9 years old, Arlena fell into a coma as a result of her disease and died soon after. The entire Twigg family was devastated, until the doctor brought them news that left them more shocked than ever before. Arlena's blood work showed an unusual inconsistency: her blood was type B. This normally wouldn't be a cause for concern, but since both Regina and Ernest were type O, the chances of them having a type B child wasn't just rare, it was impossible. The genetic tests confirmed it. Arlena, whom they'd raised as their own for almost a decade, was not their biological child. On top of the grief they felt over Arlena's death was a seemingly unanswerable question: where was their child? Little did they know, she was right under their noses. The Twiggs soon learned that only 2 baby girls had been in Hardy Hospital's maternity ward the week of Arlena's birth, and after hiring a detective, they learned their daughter's name. It was Kimberly Mays. The Twiggs immediately reached out to Bob Mays, not to obtain custody of Kimberly but merely to see if she was, in fact, their biological daughter. But Bob refused to respond. "I wouldn't care if they traced her heritage to Cabbage Patch USA," Bob Mays once told reporters. "I'm her father, I always have been, and I always will be." Ultimately, court-ordered genetic tests revealed Bob's greatest fear. Somehow, Kimberly and Arlena had been switched at birth, and the media frenzy that followed catapulted each family to national attention. Instead of demanding answers as to how the switch occurred, all anyone cared about were the warring families. The Twiggs vied for visitation rights, but Bob Mays was equally determined that they never set eyes on Kimberly. Regina was villainized for sticking her nose where it didn't belong, even though Kimberly's home life wasn't what it seemed. Despite what Kimberly told reporters, life with Bob wasn't all fun and games. His ex-wife claimed that he would hit Kimberly, throw her around if she misbehaved, and verbally abuse her. The press even caught wind of the abuse. But Bob's side of the story was that Kimberly was his daughter no matter what, and that was enough for the press. Years later, it's believed that Bob used the press to distract from the question on everyone's minds: how did the switch happen? Back then, Bob was in total control of the narrative. Bob Mays did not want us to have any connection to Kimberly, Regina Twigg said. But Bob's wishes weren't to come true. A judge eventually granted the Twiggs visitation rights with Kimberly. When Kimberly was 12, the entire Twigg family met their long-lost sister and daughter for the first time. According to home videos, Kimberly called Regina Mom soon after meeting her, which was too close to comfort for Bob. They were total strangers, and until we could get this under control, it was my opinion that we shouldn't let them have any visitation at all, Bob told the press in 1993. Kimberly had a choice to make: to fight Bob's wishes or to obey them. By then, Kimberly had made her decision. Now 14, the girl who had appeared so happy with the Twiggs suddenly wanted nothing to do with them. She not only decided to stop visiting the Twiggs, but to cut all ties with them the most permanent way she knew how. Kimberly petitioned a state judge for a legal divorce from the Twiggs. Kimberly, who once called Regina Mom and was on tape laughing and bonding with her biological family, sat before a judge and claimed that she wanted nothing to do with the Twiggs. "To get them out of my life, I'll do everything I can," Kimberly told Barbara Walters in an exclusive 1993 interview. Her reasoning? To make everything, the press, the judgment, and the pressure coming from all sides, finally stop. During the court proceedings, the judge asked Kimberly what her greatest fear was in regard to the case. "Being taken away from my father," she responded. Still, Regina Twigg was steadfast in her belief that Kimberly needed a connection with her biological family. "If she ever wants to see us again, all she has to do is come to the door, because we're here, and we love her," Regina told Barbara Walters in an interview. Even then, Regina saw the writing on the courtroom wall. Eventually, the judge declared Kimberly legally divorced from the Twiggs, and denied them any visitation rights. The divorce seemed to mark the end of the media frenzy surrounding Kimberly, and her life was expected to go back to normal. Until months later, when Kimberly was found in the most unlikely of places, with the Twiggs. Kimberly admitted years later that it was Bob's abusive ways that drove her to a YMCA shelter and then to the only other safe place she could think of. "I stayed with the Twiggs a year and a half to 2 years almost," Kimberly revealed. She depended on the family she had emancipated herself from for food and shelter, but it wasn't always the paradise she hoped for. "I was never close with Regina," Kimberly said of her experience living with the Twiggs. "But I do know she has a good heart." Still, Kimberly can't stop wondering about that fateful day in the hospital. "How did I get switched, and why?" she wonders years later. Despite the years of media attention, no one had ever uncovered the true story behind the switch, and it seemed they never would, until someone spoke up from the most unexpected place. When Patsy Webb came forward with her own story in 1993, it was from her deathbed. A former nurse's aide at Hardy Hospital, she claimed she was there the day the babies were switched, and that none of it was an accident. Even before hearing Patsy's story, Regina was convinced that Dr. Ernest Palmer, the longtime chief of Hardy Hospital, had ordered the staff to switch the baby's ID bands. The reason why goes all the way back to Barbara and to her sad story. Regina speculated that Barbara, who was desperate for a baby, gave birth to a little girl with a heart defect. She was told that the baby wouldn't survive into adulthood. At the same time, Regina gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Dr. Palmer, a close friend of Barbara's family, allegedly switched the babies in order to spare the Mays further heartbreak. For years, the Twiggs were the only vocal supporters of this theory, until Patsy came along. Dr. Palmer asked me to switch the bands on the baby and mother, Patsy revealed. She refused to do so, but she stayed silent because she didn't want to be fired. When Patsy's side of the story broke, the hospital shrugged her off. They claimed that Patsy was eccentric, an unreliable witness. But her family and many reporters connected to the case felt that she was telling the truth, which she did, her son claims, in order to clear her conscience before she died. She never asked for money, she wasn't seeking any type of notoriety, she didn't want that, an attorney close to the case said. She wanted to tell her story and move on. Patsy's story could have turned the case in an entirely new direction. But because she only did one interview, Patsy's story never gained much attention, and Kimberly's own story ended the way it did: divorce, reconciliation, and eventual estrangement from anyone she ever called family. Nowadays, Kimberly refuses to live in the past. "I wish I could turn back the hands of time on a lot of things, but I can't," Kimberly admitted as an adult. No one knows what would have been different had the switch never occurred, but Kimberly finally knows her next step: "I have to move forward." Please share this with your friends and family.